My math tutoring field placement at Taylor Elementary was one of the most challenging yet rewarding experiences I have had in program thus far. Math has always been a difficult subject for me to grasp, so when I found out that I was going to have to tutor 3 third graders in this subject, I was scared to say the least. I was not confident in myself as a mathematician, so I did not understand how I would be capable of helping others do math. I was nervous that my tutoring time would do more harm than good. I went into my first day of tutoring feeling both nervous and excited about the experience. I left feeling confident about my connection I had made with the students, but discouraged with the actual tutoring time. I felt as though there was just not enough time to get any true teaching done, and I walked out with the question, will I ever be able to teach my students math in a meaningful way in such a short amount of time? I quickly realized that my beginning lessons were far too long and complex, which caused the majority of our time together to be direct instruction. On these days, my students rarely had time to work independently on the math skills that they had just been taught. I came to the realization that if I was ever going to be able to teach my students math in a meaningful way in the short amount of time, something had to change. I began creating a clear objective statement for each of my lessons and stated it to my students at the very beginning of my direct instruction. I found that when my students knew from the very beginning what they were going to be learning that day, they were more engaged in the direct instruction, guided practice, and their independent practice. After just the first day of doing this, I began to see huge improvements in my students' work and ability to solve problems, and my confidence in myself as a teacher began to rise. I had finally grasped the ability to state things to my students in a clear and concise way instead of talking in circles as I had previously done. Although this helped my students improve tremendously, I still wrestled with my beginning question that was lingering over me. Will I ever be able to teach my students math in a meaningful way in such a short amount of time? I had mastered the ability to manage our time efficiently, but I was still probing with the concept of teaching math in a meaningful way. I began creating word problems that involved actual places and objects that my students enjoyed. One of my students' favorite lessons was getting to plan a party. I provided a party planning sheet with the prices of several items and gave them a budget of $100. My students had to work together as a team to decide what activities, foods, beverages, and decorations they would have at their party, all while constantly keeping track of how much money they had spent as well as how much money they had left to spend. Through this lesson, my students were able to experience real-life situations such as planning, budgeting, and keeping track of their spending. These fun and engaging lessons kept my students on task the entire time and taught them math concepts in a meaningful way. As my students were working on problems, I was constantly assessing them through the use of a checklist and a running record. I found these things to be imperative. I was able to use my assessments to inform my teaching because they showed me what my students struggled with as a whole, as well as what instructions needed to be scaffolded based on their individual results. Looking back on this time of tutoring, I am confident in the fact that it is quite possible to teach my students math in a meaningful way in a short amount of time. By setting students up for success, by clearly stating what you expect of them, and by creating meaningful and engaging scenarios, students are able to confidently master math problems that they once found seemingly impossible. As I look into the future, I will take this idea with me. I plan on continuing this type of engaging teaching in my own classroom by establishing a community of learners. I will create problems based on the interests of my students. This will allow my students to feel as though they are a part of the math problem, which will give them the motivation to find a solution.